All right, everybody. My name is Dr. Luke Mashburn, and in this presentation, we're looking at fan experience. We're looking at the practical and academic history of it, and how it's a bit of an overlooked marketing concept, and how it has been really for a long time, both in the industry and in academics. I'm with Georgia Highlands College, and there is my email address right there if you have any questions about this brief presentation. Looking at our introduction, what is fan experience? That's a good question. And if you pulled a journal article on this, you would have one definition. And if you pulled another journal article, you probably have a different definition. Fan experience is really just all of the various things that takes place at a game, outside of the game. Wakefield defines that as what he calls sportscape, and that has a number of factors, including concession, scoreboard, and sound. This was a theory from the 90s, so he calls it scoreboard and not video board, or a modern term that we use now. Crowding, things like that. Lee, who probably wrote the seminal work on fan experience just a little over a decade ago, defines it related to sensory scape and to the feelings and the senses that we have at a game. Of course, being sight, sound, touch, smell, being tied to the experiences that we have. But essentially, fan experience is the activities that take place, and then the result of that. So this is where Wakefield does a really good job of talking about that there is going to be a behavioral response, and that there is a desire to return or a desire not to return. And there's always going to be a behavioral response to the fan experience, or to the things that take place at a game. Why does it matter? Attendance is down, and it's been down. It's gone back up a little bit this year in very recent years. Let's wait until the end of the MLB season to see that, but MLB is ticking up. NFL did pretty good last year. College football was on the upswing as well. But prior to last season, and particularly prior to the pandemic, attendance in all sports had been down across the board. College football, baseball, even the NFL, the NBA, NHL, had all been down in attendance. There are plenty of studies that show that from 2000 to 2019, attendance was down about 5%. The Detroit Tigers were the worst team during that time period, and lost a significant amount of in-person attendance. We can ask why that happens. And again, there's a myriad of studies out there that examine why is attendance down. Everyone wants to point to TV, but look, TV broadcast numbers are down as well. There's all kind of issues with Gen Z not being as interested in sports, and again, plenty of studies delve into why that is the case. But those things are the reason why this matters, why fan experience matters, because that in-person experience, creating something that's going to be lasting, that's going to be meaningful to those different generations and appealing to those different generations, is really going to be the thing that keeps sports going. Honestly, I think we all know where our money comes from in sports these days. That is from sponsorships and from broadcast, and no one is going to pay to broadcast games. Our networks are not going to give the big right fees that they do if no one's watching. Nor are sponsors going to put their names on stadiums, slap their names on leagues or jersey patches or anything like that if no one's watching. Eyeballs is what's important, and fan experience is a way to get more eyeballs in there. We'll, in this study, look at examples both from the academic theory and some practical examples that we've seen over the history of sports. So jumping right into the theory, really, this kind of goes back to a marketing theory, 1984 Grand Ru's service quality model, which 1984 is not that long ago. And that is not a sports marketing concept. That is a general marketing concept that, of course, is about 40 years old. And so by and large, that's how old this concept is. Grand Ruse does a really great job with service quality model of talking about the two sides of an experience of a service encounter, and those are technical and functional. Functional is what happened, or how did it happen, and technical is what happened. So with the technical, if you're on an airplane, did it get to the right city? Did your flight land on time? That's the technical aspects. The functional aspects are what makes up a good flight. Anybody who's flown, anybody who's there for the conference right now, maybe you didn't have the best flight, right? There are things that just because you got to the right city and it was on time could make it a bad flight. The flight attendants could have been rude. The boarding process could have been clunky, particularly depending on your airline, right? You could have been sitting next to a screaming child the entire time, or there was someone behind you kicking your seat. These are all things that lead to a bad experience. That's functional. Technical is, did we get there? In sports, we can't really control the technical, can we? Most people will look at this from a standpoint of, we said we'd play a game, we said you'd have a seat, those things were there. Maybe with the case of a rain out, we're not able to do that, but for the most part, that's there. Some people do look at technical quality as the quality of the game itself, but sports marketing departments, front office staffs can't really control that. They can just control what happens outside of the field of play or outside of the court. So that's not going to be an option for a lot of marketers to control a really good game. What they can control is the functional aspects. How was the experience? Was the stadium clean? Were the bathrooms clean? Were there not long lines for those? Same thing with concessions. Were the lines not long? Were the prices affordable? All of these things. And so that's what Grand Ruse really looked at from a broad standpoint. Bittner looked at something called Servicescape, which was really a retail concept, taking some of Grand Ruse ideas and putting it in to the retail space, and that the physical space can impact the way you buy. And that's obviously really important. Looked at a number of things as far as impulse purchases and things like that. That's why we have magazines at the register at the grocery store. But also looked at just the physical environment overall and how people would purchase more in a clean store, in a well-lit store. These concepts moved to sports in earnest with a study from Melnick in 1993, which I'll admit, for someone born in 1988, it was very interesting reading this study and reading about smoking areas in stadiums. That's not something I remember. I've been in one stadium that I remember people smoking in, and it was in Little Rock, Arkansas in the mid-2000s. But I don't remember there being smoking sections in stadiums and things like that. But Melnick was the first to write about this shift in the sports industry, that just having a winning team wouldn't necessarily fill up your stadium. Prior to this, teams and academics believed that if you had a great team, a good product on the field, that technical quality, nothing else mattered. The functional quality wasn't important, because if you had a winner, you were going to be okay. What Melnick doesn't talk about is, what if you had a loser? And we'll talk a little bit about that with our practical examples, because that's where most of our history comes from, is teams that weren't getting it done on the field and had to do other things. But Melnick looked at this concept of you didn't have to, a winning team didn't necessarily mean you were going to have a full stadium anymore. And again, that was 1993. So we are talking exactly 30 years ago. It's not a long time to have a concept. And then Wakefield took some of Melnick's thoughts and Bittner's Servicescapes concept and turned that into Sportscape, which of course I talked about on the last slide. This idea that all of the things, the video board, the concessions, the restrooms, lead to an emotional response, and that emotional response leads to a behavioral response, and that behavioral response is return or not return. There have been literally hundreds of studies that have cited Wakefield and the original work, which was Wakefield, Sloan, and Blodgett in 1995. Wakefield went on to write separate pieces with both of those. and doing his own solo work really through about 2018, and Wakefield still updates his textbook with the service-scape concept as well. But there have been some, I believe, 400 studies that have been born of that concept. And they've looked at all sort of different theories. Personally, my dissertation was based on this concept, and I looked at a number of factors there, which is why this is such an important topic to me. Lee is, again, as I mentioned on the last slide, sort of the seminal work for fan experience. He took it in a sensory-scape concept. Again, sensory-scape being born of Bittner's service-scape on the marketing side, and the idea that, again, the physical environment and the physical environment that impacts our senses is really important. And then Slavich took it a little further. He's looking at concessions as well as traditions in his work, which again really just ties to the broader fan experience. So again, we've got 40 years of general theory here, and we've got about 30 years of sports theory, but not a ton of work on this area. Most of the theories, most of the pieces, I should say, and any advances to the theories are really tied fairly closely to Wakefield, although some do tie a little closer to Lee in 2012. But again, 2012, that's a decade ago, right? That's not that long ago. So this is not a concept that is very well researched or very well looked at, which again doesn't really make a lot of sense because fan experience is so important. Anybody knows that if you're treated well at a place, it's why you'll go back to it. I'm going to go very Southern on you guys. It's why I eat Chick-fil-A instead of Popeyes. As much as I love Popeyes, I get treated a little better at Chick-fil-A. And if you eat at either one of those establishments, you know what I'm talking about. And so that's why I continue to patronize one over the other, because the way you're treated at places matters. And it seems like we see that in every other industry. We see it in retail, right? What's the difference between Walmart and Target? We all know that. But we don't see it as much in the sports industry, at least not maybe as much as we should have until recently. And so looking at a few practical examples, obviously Bill Veeck is a marketing legend, and he did in a lot of ways focus on the fan experience. Some of his marketing stunts were designed to really engage the fans and to make it a great experience. Probably the best example is a lot of people don't know that he worked for the Chicago Cubs before he worked and owned the Chicago White Sox, which he was most famous for, one of the teams that he owned over his career. And he first started calling Wrigley Field beautiful Wrigley Field. And he really delved into that friendly confines concept. And so that was how he marketed that stadium, because it was older and a bit run down. And the Cubs weren't as good as the White Sox at that time. And so he used that marketing concept to try to let the fans know they'd have a great, fun experience at a beautiful complex. Disco Demolition Night, the crowd manager night, where if you don't know, the crowd was holding up pitches and signs and things like that. And then the coach signed it in. And then, of course, sending up Eddie Gaedel. Eddie Gaedel and Disco Demolition Night, a little more marketing stunts, of course, which ironically, my other presentation in this conference is about failed marketing stunts that led to MLB forfeits. But those are things that tie to the experience. The Cleveland Indians, very famous for 10-cent beer night, which again is in my presentation of things that go horribly, horribly wrong. And then we had a building boom in the 90s of new stadiums designed to tie to younger fans, having lots of different activities, lots of things to do. If you went to an MLB game, particularly in the 90s, the cookie cutter stadiums were gone, and the new stadiums had things in the outfield for fans and families to do. So let's make it clear, fan experience is marketing. I'm moving quickly through my conclusion now as I have my timer up. Fan experience is marketing. How we treat people will determine whether or not they come back. And due to those declining attendances coming out of a pandemic, the in-person experience is really just as important as ever, and it's probably more important than ever. So thank you so much, and have a great day.